The great doors of Blackthorn Keep swung open that morning without warning. No herald announced them. No guard escorted them. Two small boys simply walked into the royal court, as if they had been there 100 times before, their small boots clicking against the polished stone floor, their chins lifted with a confidence that belonged to people twice their age and 10 times their rank. The elder twin, Caspian, led the way. He moved with his chest slightly forward, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his eyes sweeping the painted ceiling above him, like he was already deciding what changes he would make. Behind him, half a step back, walked Elian. He was quieter in the way still water is quiet, not empty, but deep. His silver eyes moved slowly across every face in the room, studying, measuring, storing. The royal court was in full session. Nobles stood in their arranged positions. Scribes bent over their papers. Guards lined the walls with their polished weapons and practiced stillness. At the far end of the great hall, raised above everything on a stone dais, sat King Arden Blackthorn. He was in the middle of listening to a land dispute that had gone on for nearly an hour. His expression was patient in the way that mountains are patient, unmoved but present. One hand rested on the arm of his throne. His silver eyes, sharp even across the length of that long hall, were moving toward the doors before the murmuring in the room told him something had changed. He saw the boys. The entire court seemed to stop breathing at the same moment. Because those eyes, that jaw, that particular way of standing as if the ground beneath them was personally theirs, were unmistakably Blackthorn. Arden rose from his throne slowly. He did not speak. He simply stood, and the silence around him became absolute. Then Serafina Voss stepped through the open doors. She was breathless. Her dark coat was slightly dusty from travel, her hair pinned but imperfect, the look of a woman who had been trying to catch two fast children through palace corridors for the last several minutes. She stopped when she crossed the threshold. She looked up, across the length of the hall, and her eyes met Arden's for the first time in 7 years. Neither of them moved. Caspian, unbothered by any of this, turned back to look at her. "We found him," he announced, as if this had been the plan all along. Elian said nothing. He was still watching the man on the dais with that quiet, careful attention that missed nothing. After a long moment, he reached over and tugged his brother's sleeve. "That's him," he said softly. "I can tell." 7 years before that morning, Serafina Voss was nobody important. She was a healer's apprentice, skilled, serious, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. She had been brought to the royal palace during a difficult winter, when a fever moved through the lower quarters of the city, and the palace healers needed extra hands. She was 22 years old, practical, and entirely focused on her work. She was not the kind of person who ended up in the king's story. Except that she did. It began with an argument. She had been restocking a corridor cabinet when Arden passed with 2 senior advisors, and stopped to question why a particular remedy had been substituted with a cheaper alternative. Serafina, without looking up from what she was doing, explained precisely why the substitute was actually more effective, listed 3 reasons, and went back to her work. The advisors were horrified. The king was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her a follow-up question. She answered it the same way, directly, without ceremony. He came back the next day with another question, and the day after that. For 3 months, something honest and unplanned grew between them in the quiet spaces of that palace, in corridor conversations, and late evenings when the court was asleep, and the world felt smaller and more manageable. He told her things he told no one else, not because she asked, but because she listened, without wanting anything from what she heard. She was not dazzled by his title. She was not afraid of his moods. She simply saw him, and he saw her, fully, perhaps more fully than anyone ever had. Then one morning, she received a letter. It bore his seal, the black thorn crest she had seen on every official document in the palace. The handwriting was precise and formal. The message was brief. She had served her purpose. She was a pleasant distraction, but the king had responsibilities that required his full attention, and her presence was no longer appropriate. She was to leave the palace grounds by nightfall. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in the inside pocket of her coat, packed her belongings, and walked out of the palace, without telling a single person where she was going. She held her chin level the entire way. She did not allow herself to fall apart until she was far beyond the city gates, alone on the road north toward her uncle's home in the Highlands. She was 4 weeks pregnant. She did not know it yet. By the time she understood, she was already settled in her uncle's home, a modest stone house in a village so small it appeared on no important map. She sat with the knowledge for a long time before she made her decision. She would not go back. The letter had been clear. Whatever she believed she had found with Arden Blackthorne, he had found something different, or perhaps nothing at all. She was not going to arrive on the steps of a royal palace, carrying proof of a night she had been told to forget, and ask a king to acknowledge her. She had too much self-respect for that, and the child growing inside her deserved a mother with self-respect. Her uncle asked no questions. He simply made room. The twins arrived together, which surprised everyone, including the midwife. Caspian came first, loud and furious, as if offended by the entire process. Elian came second, quiet and watchful, already seeming to understand that observation was more useful than noise. Serafina raised them in that highland village, with an honesty that had one careful gap in it. She told them their father was a great man. She told them circumstances had been complicated. She told them he had not known about them, which was true. But she did not tell them why, and she never spoke his name, and she never called him a king. Caspian pushed for more information constantly, impatiently, the way he pushed for everything. Elian collected every detail she gave them and stored it in some internal archive, never pressing, just building. They were 7 years old when her uncle died. The inheritance was simple, but required a capital solicitor to process the legal paperwork. There was no way around it. Serafina packed carefully, chose an inn far from the palace district, planned her days to stay well outside the areas where she might be recognized, and told herself firmly that the city was large and the chances of any complication were very small. She did not account for the fact that her sons had, at some point in their 7 years, developed a complete inability to stay where they were placed. The court had been cleared, the land dispute, the scribes, the arranged nobles, all of it excused with a single look from the king. Only a handful of senior guards remained, standing far enough back to be present, without being intrusive. Arden stood at the base of the dais steps. Serafina stood across from him. The twins stood between them, Caspian looking alert and interested, Elian looking at everything. Arden looked at the boys for a long moment. Then he looked at Serafina. His expression was controlled, but something beneath it was not. "You have questions," he said, and the words were directed at Elian. Elian met his gaze. "Several," he said. Caspian crossed his arms. "Are you actually the king?" "I am." Caspian considered this. "Our mother said you were a great man who didn't know what he had." He tilted his head slightly. "She didn't say you were a king." Serafina closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them and stepped forward. "Your Majesty." Her voice was steady. She had made it steady through effort and practice. "My sons took a wrong corridor. I apologize for the disruption. We have a legal matter in the city, nothing connected to the court. I am asking permission to withdraw." Arden looked at her. "Denied," he said quietly. He led them to a private receiving chamber, not a throne room, not a formal space, just a room with a fire and 4 chairs and high windows letting in the early light. A servant brought something warm for the boys. Caspian immediately began negotiating for more of it. Elian sat in his chair and kept watching. When it was just the 2 of them, the boys occupied, the door closed. Arden asked only one thing. "Why did you leave?" Serafina reached into the inside pocket of her coat. She had carried the letter for 7 years. She had never fully understood why, perhaps because she needed the reminder not to trust easily. She unfolded it and held it out to him. He took it. He read it. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before something breaks. "I didn't write this," he said. His voice was low, not defensive, certain. He turned the paper over, studied the seal, and then he was still for a long moment, in the way that meant something was moving fast behind his eyes. "I know this handwriting," he said. It was not a question. He called for Lady Mira Caldwell. She entered composed. She had always been composed. It was her greatest skill. She was elegant and precise, and she had spent years moving through court politics, the way experienced hands move through complicated machinery, touching exactly the right parts. Arden said nothing when she came in. He simply held out the letter. Something changed in her face. It was small, barely visible, but Elian, sitting quietly in his chair across the room, saw it. He saw everything. The story came out in the way confessions do, when the person has carried them past the point of usefulness. Lady Mira had recognized what was forming between Arden and Serafina 7 years ago. She had seen it clearly before most people noticed it at all. She had also understood what it meant for her own position, her family's arrangement with the crown, her carefully planned future. So she had acted. The seal had been borrowed during a social event. The letter had been written and delivered before Serafina had any reason to doubt its source. It was clean, precise, and perfectly timed. She had not expected Serafina to disappear so completely. She had expected tears, maybe a scene, maybe a quiet departure back to wherever she came from. She had not expected silence. She had certainly never expected children. "I protected the interests of the crown," she said, and even now there was a quality of belief in her voice that was more frightening than dishonesty. Arden looked at her for a long time. "You decided what the crown's interests were," he said, "without being asked, without authority, and you used them to deceive me, alter my correspondence, and remove a woman from this palace under false pretense." He paused. "A woman who was carrying my children." He stripped her titles in the same calm, even voice he used for everything. She was escorted from the room without further ceremony. She did not look back. The boys had been taken to a smaller room with food and books. This had been Elian's idea, offered practically and without drama. Caspian agreed only because he had decided, based on available evidence, that the royal kitchen was probably superior to anything he had eaten in the Highlands. Arden and Serafina were alone. 7 years of distance sat between them, and neither of them rushed to fill it. "I looked for you," he said finally. 3 months after you left, I sent riders north and east. You had left no path to follow." "I didn't want to be found," she said. "I thought I was protecting myself. Later, I thought I was protecting them." "From me?" "From rejection," she corrected quietly. "I had already received what I believed was your answer. I wasn't going to ask the question twice." He was quiet for a moment. "I spent a long time believing you chose to leave. That whatever existed between us was something I had imagined or overstated." His jaw tightened briefly. "It was not a comfortable thing to believe." "No," she agreed. "Neither was mine. They were not the same people who had spoken in palace corridors 7 years ago. Both of them understood that. The years had changed the shape of them, added weight in some places, removed softness in others, but the recognition between them was still there, uncomfortable and real, like a word you know but cannot quite say. He did not reach for her. He did not make promises. He was a proud man who had learned, sometime between then and now, that pride was a poor substitute for honesty. "I want to know my sons," he said. "I am asking you, not commanding, for the chance to do that." She looked at him for a long time. "Ask them," she said. "They're their own people. It was never only my decision." Caspian presented his conditions formally, standing in the middle of the room with his arms crossed, as if he had been preparing for this moment. The list was detailed. It included the right to ask any question and receive a real answer, the right to leave if he decided to, and access to the palace horses. Arden listened to every item without smiling, which Caspian respected more than he would have respected agreement. Elian waited until his brother was done. Then he asked the king one question, and it settled over the room like something heavy placed gently down. "Did you know about us and choose not to come?" "No," Arden said. He held the boy's gaze without flinching. "I did not know, and if I had, nothing in this world would have kept me from you." Elian was quiet for a moment. He looked at his brother, then back at Arden. Then he gave one small, slow nod, the kind that meant the answer had been weighed and found acceptable. That was enough. For now, it was enough. The next morning came in gold and cool air through the high windows of Blackthorn Keep. Serafina stood in the guest wing, watching the light change over the city below. She had not agreed to anything permanent. She had agreed to breakfast, and to one more day, and to the principle that her sons deserved to know where they came from. Caspian was somewhere below, already in conversation with a royal guard about the ceremonial weapons displayed in the East Hall. The guard sounded uncertain. Caspian sounded confident. This was the usual dynamic. Elian was in the royal library. He had found it at dawn and had not come out. Arden found Seraphina at the window. He stood beside her, close but not touching, just present, just near enough that she was aware of him, and that the awareness was not unwelcome. "This will not be simple," he said. She looked out at the city, waking below them. "I raised 2 boys alone in a highland village for 7 years," she said. "I never expected simple." He almost smiled. It was a small thing, just a shift at the corner of his mouth, but she caught it, and something in her chest settled very slightly, like a door finding its frame. Outside, the city moved and breathed. Inside the royal library, a 7-year-old boy sat cross-legged on a large chair, with an enormous book open across his lap, reading the history of a kingdom that was, it turned out, at least partly his own. He turned the page carefully. He had only just begun,